classes here, so thanks for coming to support your classmate. This is Calah's second semester in Bibles Lit. She took Old Testament last semester, and when she came into the class, she was a great writer already, but I think she was a little nervous about taking risks, as some of you may be in the class now. And don't get mad at me for saying this, Calah, but one of the first blog questions she asked was, is my name biblical, or where does my name come from in the Bible? And I thought, well, this is going to be a pretty quickly researchable question that's not going to take her very far, but what she's done for her presentation today is just kind of mind-boggling. She's taken some ideas and some concepts that started in the Old Testament and have kind of worked their way through the New Testament. She has been able to research and pick up themes and trends, and it has just been honestly fun for me to read her vlogs last semester and this semester as she's kind of created this thematic approach to conducting research. And so I'm very proud of you, and she's going to talk to us today about some stories that are in the New Testament, but kind of lead up to how those came to be organized and included based on the treatment of women in the Old Testament as well. So without further commentary, Calah, come on.
Okay, so like Ms. Foster said, I have, in this class, mostly focused on women in the Bible. It's just fascinating to me. So today my presentation is on the story of the hemorrhaging woman and the ruler's daughter, and then I'm going to take it a little further to talk about the progressive nature of gender roles in the text as a whole. So this story is contained in all the synoptic gospels. It's an intercalation, which means that the first narrative begins and is interrupted by the second narrative. It's basically a story within a story. And it places emphasis on faith, perspectives of people in society based on the audience, and it's also going to provide my example for the progressive nature of gender roles. So in order to really understand why this story is significant, it's important to talk about the Jewish standards of cleanliness and purity. These laws were well established, and they would have already been known very well by the time that the woman and the ruler's daughter would have been alive. These laws are found mainly in Leviticus and Numbers, and the laws that I'm going to talk about are laws that relate to menstruating women, corpses, and the transferring uncleanness. So for this woman, she had an issue of blood, and in the time, the law explains that any menstruating woman is only considered unclean while they bled. But L. Lewis Wall, a writer for Christianity Today, specified that there's a difference established in Leviticus between just a regular woman and then a regular bleeder. So she would have had a more precarious ritual status. She was considered a Zaba, not a Nida, and I don't know Hebrew, so I don't know how to say those correctly, which meant that she was impure not only during her bleeding, but also for a week after each of her episodes. So basically, she was just ritually impure because she didn't stop bleeding for 12 years. And when it came to corpses, Numbers 19 and 11 states that any person who comes into contact with a corpse is considered unclean for 7 days. And then there's this idea in Jewish law of transferring uncleanness. And Jesus would have known all of these laws, but he still chose to heal both the woman and the daughter. Robin Branch, a faculty of theology at Northwestern University, makes a really great point as to why this wouldn't have mattered to Jesus. She said, "The woman touches Jesus' clothes from behind without his knowledge or volition. Jesus touches the dead girl. Both encounters do not render Jesus unclean, indeed, because there's no evidence. Instead of uncleanness flowing to Jesus from the woman, healing flows to the woman from Jesus. And instead of death contaminating Jesus, the child lives and is ready to eat." So there are several connections between these stories. I'm just going to touch a few. They're both miraculous healings, and they're both great examples of Jesus' ministry because, most of what we know from the Bible about his ministry are healings and his discourses. So there's an intense desperation felt by both Jairus and the woman. Jairus came to Jesus, and he's of a much lower status because Jairus was a religious leader, and Jesus was just a carpenter's son. And no doubt he probably heard stories about Jesus healing people and thought, okay, I've already tried everything else, let's try this. The woman had seen all of the physicians that she could see. She'd spent all of her money, and she was now living in poverty because she had tried so hard to find a cure for her issue. The use of touch, this goes back to the laws about cleanliness and how Jesus chose to heal both of these people when, in reality, after the woman had touched him, he should have gone home and gone through the rituals for cleaning himself. The number 12, this one's really important to me, and it kind of stuck out a lot because the woman had dealt with this issue for 12 years, and the girl was only 12 years old. And so the girl was just entering into womanhood, and the woman had been dealing with this issue associated with womanhood for 12 years. The only difference, really, the main difference, is the way that the healings were sought out. The woman seeks her healing in private. She's just very content to just touch his hem as he passes by. And it shows her low standing and her shame at having to find healing in whatever way she can. But Jairus comes up and he says, "Can you heal my daughter? Come home with me, heal my daughter." And it just shows his standing too, that he's so open to be able to just come and ask. So, as I said, this is an intercalation. So it seems that the woman is interrupting Jairus' request, and she is. But I think that it's very necessary for her to do this. This story shows Jesus' compassion for all of his followers, despite social standing, class, or gender, or impurity. The woman has a faith that Jairus really just doesn't. Jairus is coming to Jesus as a last resort, and this woman has heard all of these stories, and she says, "If I can just touch his hem, I know I'll be healed." So Jesus lifts her up to almost an equal standing with Jairus and uses her as a instructional tool for Jairus to learn how to be faithful. So the idea of identity plays a big role in a lot of the Bible, but specifically in this story, there are two completely different identities. Jairus is a religious leader. He's well known. He's of high stature. And the woman is an outcast. She's unclean. And as we can tell from the story, she probably doesn't have anybody to take care of her because of the lengths that they would have had to go through to be considered clean. But we also see a shift in the woman's identity after her interaction with Jesus. He calls her daughter. And the fact that Jairus is asking for healing for his daughter just really drives that home for me, because it shows the endearment that Jesus felt towards her, the same that Jairus must have felt for his daughter. And it also, when he calls her daughter, is a sign that she's welcomed back into the community. She's healed, she's clean, she doesn't have to be an outcast anymore. And so I really want to use this idea of identity to discuss some of the regressive nature of women in the Bible. So many would probably refer to the Bible as a misogynistic text, which I probably would have thought too before starting this class and doing all this research. But it's actually full of women going against what was expected by the standards of the time to do either great or horrible things. So I'm going to discuss just a few of these women. I wish I had time to do more, but I don't. And I'm going to do it in a side-by-side comparison. I found some really cool links between some of them that I think are going to be really neat. So the first one I'm going to talk about the woman with the issue of blood and the Samaritan woman at the well. They're both considered outcasts. The woman because she's considered impure. And the woman at the well is actually what I like to call a double outcast. She's a Samaritan, so she's already outcast by Jews. But she also, in her Samaritan community, has had 5 husbands and is cohabitating with a 6th who is not her husband, so she's also an outcast just from the Samaritans. But they both experience a shift in identity after their interaction with Jesus. The woman is healed, she's clean, and she's welcomed back into society. And the woman at the well actually becomes a teacher, and she goes into town and she tells all these other Samaritans, "This man knows everything that I've done. Come talk to him, listen to him." And so because of her, a lot of Samaritans began to follow Jesus, and so she's a witness. So they're both used as teachers. They're both commended for their faith and their honesty, and they're both used as examples of what faith looks like for others. And so now I have Ruth and Rahab, and I know that it kind of seems like a little bit of a stretch to put Ruth with Rahab, because Ruth is, depicted as this loyal and honest and brave woman, and Rahab is a harlot. But I have a point. So they're both foreigners, and that automatically just makes them kind of outcast in Jewish society because they're different religions. But they both save their families, basically. Ruth, by marrying Boaz, gives Naomi back her hope, because after Naomi loses her sons and her husband, she changes her name and she becomes bitter and she just loses her hope for happiness. And Ruth stays with her and she marries Boaz, who is related to Naomi, and she has a son. And she gives the son to Naomi, and she saves her family. But she's also in the Davidic lineage, so without Ruth we wouldn't have Jesus. So, and then Rahab, she hides the spies when they come into Jericho to see what they're coming up against. And she's the only one in Jericho left untouched because she has such a faith in these disciples, these people that have come, these spies that have come to see Jericho. And so she hides them, and they offer her a favor, and she says, could you just spare me and my family? I know that you guys are stronger than us and you're going to take us over. And so they're both noted for their devotion to their family and their faith, but I think that they also should be noted for their bravery. And so now we have Deborah and Jael. And again, Deborah is noted as this prophetess. She's given high regard. She calls herself the mother of Israel. And then Jael is just barely given any thought. She is what Loft refers to as the woman who did a horrid thing with a tent peg, which, I mean, it's very gruesome, but they're both necessary because they both need each other to make this work. So Nora Loft, she's a British author, and she stated that the two women are directly opposite, absolutely complementary in nature, and it took the two of them to free Israel from the threat of the Canaanites. Without Deborah, they would have never gone to war, and Sisera, the leader of the army, would not have run to Jael's tent. And without Jael, Sisera would have not been dead and would have gone back to get more for his army and come back and fought the Israelites again. So they're both completely necessary, and they need each other for this to work. And Deborah actually prophesied about Jael, and it's kind of like Barak probably thought that Deborah was talking about herself when she said that Sisera would be delivered into the hands of a woman. But she was talking about Jael because Jael kills him. So my next two are Herod's wife and Pilate's wife. And I like this one because it just shows the power that some of these women had over their husbands. And I was going to talk about Eve in this one, but Eve is just so talked about all the time. So I just found two more obscure ones and went with it. So Herodias, Herod's wife, she wanted him to kill John the Baptist because John the Baptist didn't agree with her marriage to Herod because he was her brother-in-law, and they did not go by the tradition of the time to do that. And so he eventually caves in what she wants, mostly because she enlists the help of her daughter, which I will talk about in just a little bit. But Pilate's wife has a dream, and she says, please don't kill Jesus, don't do it. Like, I've had a dream, this is not a good idea. And he wants to listen to her. He really tries. He says, you guys, do you really want me to kill Jesus? And they're like, kill him, kill him. So he tries to listen to her, but he can't because of the crowd. And so next I'm going to talk about Esther 2 times. I just really like Esther. I think that there's a lot of research that could be done about her. So I'm going to talk about Vashti and Esther. And they're the same, but they're different. So Vashti was the king of Persia's first wife. And what happened was she was summoned to come dance in the court, and she refused to come. And so the king and all of the people in the court, they're saying, if you don't get rid of her, if you don't correct her, then all these other queens and all these women are going to say, oh, well, I don't have to do what my husband tells me to do. I don't have to listen to him. And so he listens to all these other people, and he removes her from the kingdom. She's ostracized. And so Esther comes in to replace Vashti. And she actually comes into the king's court without being summoned, which was grounds for death in those days. But instead of killing her, he rewards her with a favor, and eventually will listen to her over his most loyal advisor, Haman. So they're different, but they're the same in that they both kind of defy the king, but there's different outcomes. And so last I'm going to talk about Esther and Salome. And the interesting thing that I found when we started reading Mark, I saw this line, and when Salome came in to dance for the king in his court, the king liked it so much that he offered her a favor. And basically he said, I'll give you whatever you want, even to half of the kingdom. And so I put a question mark next to that because I was like, I've heard this before. And I started looking at it and I said, Esther had the exact same line spoken to her in Esther in the Old Testament. So they're both granted the same favor from different kings, but they use that favor in very different ways. Esther uses this favor to save not only herself, but also her people, the Jews. And so she guarantees life. And Salome uses it to get John the Baptist's head on a platter. So she seeks the destruction of John the Baptist because of the anger that her mom, Herodias, felt towards him. So another thing that I found interesting between the two of them, though, is that both of them seek their favors based on what other people want them to do. Mordecai, who is Esther's cousin, who's raised her, recognizes the power that she has to save the Jews, and she's the only one that can save them from Haman's destruction, which is also pretty neat. But Salome is encouraged by her mother to do this, and does. So they both listen to other people to get what they need. And then, in conclusion, a lot of the women in the Bible are simply referred to as the woman that did this, or the woman that did that, or just woman. Some of them are completely unnamed, only mentioned in one sentence, and then you don't know anything about them again. Some are referred to as the wife of an important king, or as a male member in society. You've got Pilate's wife, you've got Lot's wife. And that's basically all you know about them, is that they are that person's wife. And some of them are mentioned by name. You've got Esther, you've got Ruth, Deborah, and some of them even have Bible chapters in the Bible named after them. But they all play an important and remarkably progressive role in the text, even some by today's standards, because I don't really hear very many people driving tent pegs into people's heads to save countries now, even then or now. So I think that it's very important that we study these women in the way that they challenge the standards set by the law and by just traditions of the time. So that's it. Thank you.
Questions for Calah from her classmate?
Her classmate.